He was wealthy, but the house in Tulsa hummed with those damn portable generators, and the blue strips of painter's tape on the windows looked to him like bands on wrists. Ethan Rhodes, 43, founder of an autonomous trucking company, had made his own wager: speed up releases, bury defects, squeeze out an IPO, and hope statistics would cover his conscience. Today the bet was flipping, literally. On the I-44 interchange, his truck lay on its side with a toxic load, and if he hid behind lawyers again, the cloud would drift toward residential streets, and the newscasts would say his paramedic sister's name. He understood that his emotional stake wasn't money or freedom, but the right to look Rachel in the eye and the right to remain human. He hadn't been born a villain and didn't wake up thinking about risking other people's lives, although in retrospect, it looked exactly like that. 10 years earlier, he'd assembled the first prototype in an old warehouse that smelled of dust and propane, and at night he and the engineers warmed coffee on a hot plate and argued about trajectory math. Then came pilots on closed gravel pits, then on highways, and he translated every almost into ready, because the market breathed down his neck and he honestly believed that risk was a temporary tithe to progress. He leaned on the team when, after a string of small incidents, the lead engineer asked for a pause, and he personally edited emails so the internal correspondence would look less alarming, and in the IPO decks, systemic turned into edge cases. He knew where the code had temporary braces sticking out and pretended he didn't, because the board wanted quarters with positive free cash flow, and he wanted to be the one driving the future. His sister Rachel worked as a paramedic in the local service, and after one crash with his truck on the highway, where a retiree in a pickup died, they stopped talking. She didn't yell. She simply said she didn't want to hear about confidence intervals and rare factor combinations from him anymore. The truckers' union leader, Marcus, called him the man trying to push people off the road with an algorithmic bulldozer, and organized pickets at the offices with signs reading, "Don't surrender the highway to soulless code." NTSB investigator Augusta Morales pulled every documented incident and demanded a full log dump, while the district attorney made it clear that material omission wasn't a phrase, but a charge. All of this coincided with tornado season. Generators droned in the city, windows were crossed with tape. The high school gym became a temporary shelter where burritos sat on aluminum trays, and on Ethan's kitchen counter stood a box of batteries and a coiled extension cord, because the power flickered like a nervous eye. The morning began with his decision to call Rachel. His goal was basic and hard. Hear her voice and say something important in 2 sentences without statistics or caveats. The obstacle was that she no longer picked up. He stared at the screen where the contact Rachel blinked, and at the blue tape on the window he'd pressed down during the night, because the wind was hammering the neighborhood again, and he listened to the generators behind the houses. "Rachel, it's me," he said, into the void of her voicemail. "We've got a problem on 44. I'll be there. I need to set something right." Next door, something clinked. The neighbor set a box of batteries on the concrete, then shouted, "You taking food? We're hauling it to the school." "I'll take it," he said, opening the fridge. 2 plastic tubs of sauce and a pack of tortillas on the shelf. He thought, if she doesn't answer, will anything change? And then he understood. It wasn't about the phone. He felt guilt and fear. Guilt seeping into every movement like water into a crack, and fear that was simple, fear of prison, disgrace, removal from the business that was his own name. He stuffed a flashlight, a roll of electrical tape, and a first aid kit into his backpack because the habit of inventing a plan B still worked, and he drove to the gym where the volunteer hub had formed. He understood he needed not only to reach his sister, but also to see what help looked like without press releases. He realized that money was a convenient barrier you could hide behind. At noon, he stood in the City Hall conference room at a briefing where Morales had invited him unofficially, but in a way that cameras would catch his profile. His goal was to defend the notion that stopping the entire fleet was disproportionate and would harm supply during a crisis, and to bargain for at least 48 hours for an internal audit. The obstacle was that Morales held a folder with dates and charts, and the district attorney stood beside her and said, "Knowledge of wrongdoing and concealment." "Mr. Rhodes," Morales said, "we know about 4 incidents with the same pattern, and your engineers requested a pause." "We followed procedures," he said, "and every decision balanced risk and the needs of society, especially under emergency conditions." "Balanced or ignored?" the prosecutor asked. From the back row, Marcus said, "While you were balancing, my guys were catching your rigs with their shoulders because edge cases aren't a metaphor to them." Inside him, the old defense machine spun up. Now he would bring out slides on probabilities, noise levels, false positives, and once again explain that full transparency isn't feasible in real time because there's trade secret and competitive pressure. But the thought felt cheap against people who had come in carrying tornado bags. He heard a camera shutter snap. He felt shame and anger at himself because he'd brought himself to the point where any rationality sounded like an excuse. He realized his haggle with reality was ending. At the office, he gathered the engineers in the war room, where a map of the fleet hung on the wall with green and yellow dots, and his goal, simple on paper, was to accept a new patch that supposedly fixed floating behavior on wet lane markings. The obstacle was the lead engineer, Dave, who had once considered him a hero, saying with his eyes down, "We're not confident in the validation, Ethan." "Validation is sufficient for a limited rollout," he said. "We don't have the luxury of stopping everything." "It's not a luxury," said Junior Engineer May. "It's people on the road." He felt his hand reaching for the old pressure reflex, promise bonuses, frighten them with liability, pivot the conversation to metrics. He thought, "Am I really about to make them sign for a risk I'm supposed to sign for?" He offered a compromise that wasn't won. "Okay, then you put your signatures on the release," and he saw the room go quiet. He felt a sharp and painful clarity. For a decade he had built a culture where heroics equaled push through at all costs. He realized that shifting the choice to the lower level was the same old flight. He met Marcus at the cafe by the distribution center, where it smelled of cheap coffee and wet rubber mats. His goal was to reach a situational alliance so they could push for a fleet stop for safety, even if it sounded like an admission of defeat. The obstacle was his name, printed in hundreds of union posts as a symbol of the profession's threat. "You want me to go out and say we're for a stop?" Marcus said, holding a paper cup and refusing to sit. "Thought you wanted to prove your tin cans can already do it all." "I was wrong about the tempo," he said, "and about how to talk about risk." "Too late for lyricism," said a woman with a union badge, sliding into the seat. "We've got 2 in the hospital after your rare combinations." He laid a printout on the table with the emergency stop procedures, the one he'd kept out of public docs, because it scares investors. "I'll give you access numbers," he said, "and I'll go out there with you if you want, in front of cameras. But I need us to dump half the routes today and backstop zones near hospitals and schools." He felt fear, but the word guilt came into the conversation, and he said it bluntly without hiding behind quotes. He thought, which is worse, admitting I built at the wrong speed or continuing to lie? He realized their deals finally concerned people rather than charts. He went to the gym where burritos were handed out on aluminum trays, and he wanted to find Rachel. His goal was to tell her, "I'll stop," and ask for advice without manipulation. The obstacle was her chill and accumulated exhaustion. She stood at a table where someone was unpacking a box of batteries and a knotted extension cord. "I'm here," he said, "and I'm guilty, and if you say get lost, I'll leave." "You won't leave," she said calmly. "You'll talk about necessary risk and drive off with a sketch of excuses." "I will stop," he said. I'll hand over the keys and hand myself over to them. Them? The investigators? Now that finally sounds like an adult sentence. They stood and were silent, and you could hear kids chewing in the corner and a generator somewhere by the wall making an uneven b-b-b. What should I do right now? He asked. If they call you to the camera, go, but don't bargain, she said. And if one more of your trucks flips, go where it smells like bleach, not where it smells like press. He felt shame turning into resolve, and it wasn't a metaphor, just a movement toward action. He realized the advice was simple, because the right things are rarely complicated. In the evening, on the courthouse steps where he'd been called for an emergency briefing, mics surrounded him. His goal was not to stage a performance, but to keep the real decision from turning into an announcement. The obstacle was the national press, hungry for blood, and the phrase, "We're shutting down." "Mr. Rhodes," a reporter said, "do you admit you hid defects?" "Yes," he said, and heard the air around him take a pause. "Mr. Rhodes," said Morales, "the NTSB demands immediate stoppage of the fleet and access to all internal channels." "You'll have it," he said. "Now," she said. "Now," he repeated. But then someone's radio buzzed, "I-44, rollover, toxic placard, wind from the east," and the sound cut into the courthouse like a black dot on white paper. He felt his heart pull a stupid trick and understood that now had changed coordinates. "I'm going there," he said. "You can't," said a woman from the DA's office. "I need to," he said. "Don't play the hero," Morales said. But she didn't catch his arm. He understood this wasn't about heroism. He drove his old pickup fast over wet asphalt where water pooled in low spots, listening to the open channel. Dispatcher, firefighters, sheriff. The words evacuation, block the ramp, wind veering. His goal was to reach the accident site before the cloud made it to the neighborhoods and to do things with his hands, not with a press release. The obstacle was cordons, the downpour, his security guy calling to say, "Ethan, don't you dare," and the impersonal system he himself had built, where any manual intervention counted as failure. At the off-ramp, a young highway patrolman met him. "You can't, sir." "I'm not press," he said. "This is my hardware and my responsibility." "What can you do?" "I know where the emergency valve is and how to open the remote shutdown channel." 2 minutes, the patrolman said, "and if anything, back." He ducked under the tape where the wind made live little flags and thought, "Isn't this my road?" He understood the answer was both yes and no. The truck lay crosswise like a long wound, and an acrid vapor came from the torn section. Around it, only sirens, the drone of a generator for the floodlights, and occasional headlights far off. He crawled because the height wasn't measured in his body, but in the logic of metal, and he felt for the valve housing where the cold steel scratched under his fingers. He pressed the radio button. 911 dispatch, this is Ethan Rhodes, founder of the company that owns this truck. I'm on site. Record and distribute. I'm making a confession and ordering a full fleet stop. "Confirm identity," a voice said. "Confirmed. Last 4 of my phone number, my sister's name is Rachel, my address." Now the keys. "Access to shutdown panels, domain fleet ops, first stage password Tulsa Wind 7, second stage is a hardware token with Vic on the north lot, activation code A44 stop all. Immediate actions, 1. Switch all routes to emergency termination and pull to distribution center lots. 2. Block scheduled auto starts. 3. Send an alert to operators. Manual control required. 4. Spin up a hotline for driver pay for tomorrow's missed shifts. 5. Open NTSB access to all logs, including internal comments, folder, risk, hold. He spoke quickly and plainly because extra words got in the way. "Facts," he went on. "I hid defects, leaned on engineers, accelerated releases for the sake of the IPO, put a metric above a warning. That was my decision, and I answer for it. Seize all emails, you'll find my edits, and a list. By the cab there's a blue first aid kit with a patch. By the step there are 2-gallon jugs of water. The generator fuel level is half. In the glove box there's a printed emergency valve checklist. Yes, I'm turning the valve by hand right now because the remote command isn't guaranteed in the rain. Repeat, the entire fleet, stop. I'll stay on the line until you hear the click. He felt fear but kept talking, because responsibility is a verb. He heaved the emergency valve handle. The metal moved with stubborn weight. The air changed smell, less biting, and he spoke again. Do you hear it? Pressure is falling. We hear it, the dispatcher said. Routes are halted, someone from his former team said, patched into the shared channel. Received, Morales said. He heard her voice on the line, without cameras. We're getting access. Received, he said. Now I need a tow strap. He stood, went back to the pickup, grabbed his keyring, opened the box and took out the tow strap, the very one he carried, because on the highway it's better to have your own. He hooked the frame, tightened the strap, climbed into the cab, and, low-geared, pulled the trailer toward the gravel arrestor, because there the cloud would disperse toward the wasteland and not the houses. On the radio someone said, "Stop, that's unsafe," and he answered, "We were all late earlier." Rain hammered the roof, the lamps flickered, but the wheels obeyed, and the trailer, heavy as someone else's guilt, shifted inch by inch. When he backed it into the arrestor, he keyed the radio again. "Dispatch, I'm on the line." Again, "Full fleet stop, access opened, keys dictated. I'm ready to present myself at the district attorney's office. Record this. My payment is action, not a check." He felt tired and strangely calm. He realized he had chosen to stay. A day later the house was quieter because the neighborhood's generators were off, and only the fridge boomed like an old friend. On the kitchen table stood a chipped white mug with the local baseball team's logo. He drank his cooled coffee and didn't pretend it tasted like anything special. Next to it lay the pickup's keyring, heavy as plain decisions, and a stack of donation receipts. To the school gym, to the Union Family Support Fund, to the First Response Fund where Rachel was working overtime. The paper was slightly damp along the edge because he had accidentally set the mug in the wrong place. On the kitchen counter, the battery box and the coiled extension cord were still there. He wasn't in a hurry to put them away because he now lived without the theater of quick order. It didn't erase the past, but it gave him a new language for repayment. Not a press release and not a fine, but a sequence of concrete actions in which wealth isn't armor or a dome, but a subscription to other people's risk, paid for with your own presence, time, and admission. He understood that the court and cold room still lay ahead, but inside he carried a simple thesis. If your decisions hurt people, real responsibility means stepping into the line of fire and paying with deeds, not checks. He was finally answering the question he had avoided for so long, and he didn't expect relief, but he received the chance to live not behind tape, but straight on.